Hello everyone and welcome to a new video on my YouTube channel Anton GF. My name is Anton Garcia Fernandez and as usual I'm coming to you from Jackson in the state of Tennessee in the United States of America. And today I want to do a video in which I will address the question of why I enjoy reading The Adventures of Tintin. This is a question that I got from a friend of mine in the south of Spain, and I recently did a video in Spanish, which you can also find on my YouTube channel, in which I address this question for the library website of the school where this friend of mine teaches in the south of Spain. So this video that I'm doing right now is an English language version of that video in Spanish. Now, the Tintin books, all 24 adventures of Tintin, and also the black and white versions of some of them, and the myriad of books about Tintin and Hergé that have been published in different languages throughout the years, have been constant companions for me, really throughout my life. Ever since I was a very little kid, I have read these stories a million times, and it's not an exaggeration, and I have also become acquainted with the vast bibliography about Hergé and his work and about Tintin that has been published in different languages over the years. So these are important books to me, and when it comes to answering the question of why I enjoy reading the Tintin books, there are many factors, there are many reasons that I have to bear in mind, and I'm going to try to talk about them in the next few minutes in this video. So why do I enjoy reading The Adventures of Tintin? Well, first of all, from a graphic standpoint, the drawings are precise, they're very realistic, they're dynamic, they're really colorful, and very often Hergé advances the story by means of the drawings. The drawings themselves are important to the telling of the story. Sometimes he can tell parts of the story without the need for words or dialogue. Of course, there's a lot of dialogue as well in the Tintin books, but very often Hergé has a very visual way of telling a story. And that to me is really appealing. It has a lot to do with the movies. Hergé is very influenced by the cinematic techniques and by the way of telling a story in the cinema. So I think that the graphic standpoint, from that graphic standpoint, the Tintin adventures are extremely interesting. Then you have the plots. Of course, the plots are a lot simpler at the beginning than they would become later on. So the plots of adventures like Tintin in the Land of the Soviets, or Tintin in the Congo, or Tintin in America, these are a lot simpler than later stories like the Calculus Affair, for example, or the Castafiore Emerald. Hergé evolved over the years, and so did the drawings, and so did the plots as well. But whether it be the earlier stories, which are a little simpler as far as the plot, or the later ones, which are more complex, the plots are always interesting. They're always appealing. They always hook the reader from the very beginning. There's a lot of action. There's a lot of suspense, and so you become interested right away. And Hergé had a knack for coming up with plots that would become more complex as the story went by, but they were plots that very often began from a really easy, simple, everyday occurrence. And then as the pages go by, they become more complicated, they become more complex. And that is really also very appealing to me. In fact, it's very difficult for me to start a Tintin book and not read it all the way through, because it doesn't matter how many times I have read these stories. If I start a book, I can't leave it in the middle. I have to read it from the beginning to the end. And that is because I find the plots to be so gripping, so interesting. And that is, in part, why I enjoy reading Tintin so much. Now then, you have the characters. Hergé created a whole universe around Tintin. These are the adventures of Tintin, but this is not just about Tintin. There are many other characters around him. They are also an integral part of the adventures. For example, Snowy, and Captain Haddock, and Professor Calculus, and Bianca Castafiore, and some villains like Rastapopulus or Dr. Mueller, and many others, and of course the Thompsons, the detectives. Um, Many of these characters, by the way, are recurrent characters. They don't appear in just one story, but they come back, and they are part of other stories, and they do have a backstory that makes them even more interesting. You get to know them better if you read all the installments in the series, and as the series goes on, you get to know a lot of them a lot better. So the characters, they're always appealing. They're always interesting. It's always complex in many cases. And that adds to the enjoyment of reading the adventures of Tintin. I was talking about the plots before, and the plots are not only attractive and appealing, but they also have a lot of humor, and they also have a lot of irony. Even the more complex, the more convoluted plots. For example, when you think of the Moon Adventure, Objectif Lune, Destination Moon, and On a marché sur la Lune, Explorers on the Moon. Now, those are stories with a very deep, a very complex scientific content. But even in those stories, there's room for humor. There's always comic relief to counterbalance the difficulty of some aspects of the story. And I think Hergé also had a knack for introducing comic relief in the stories and for using irony to look at certain things that have to do with the reality of the characters, with the historical content of the stories. And I think that also adds to the complexity and to the interest of the adventures of Tintin. In fact, if you think about all of these stories, you may read them purely for the pleasure of the plot, purely for the enjoyment of getting to know what happens, for the adventure itself. But you can also go beyond the adventure, and you can also go deeper, because all of these stories allow for deeper reading that goes way beyond the surface and way beyond the plot itself. In fact, the Tintin books reflect and include some of the most important historical occurrences of the 20th century, which were actually occurrences which were contemporary to Hergé. We have all of those historical issues and social and political issues seen from the perspective of Hergé, the creator of Tintin. Things like, for example, the Chinese-Japanese War in the Blue Lotus, the space race in the Moon Adventures, the Cold War also in Destination Moon and Explorers on the Moon, but also in the Calculus Affair, for example. The popular revolutions in Spanish-American countries. You can see that in The Broken Ear, for example, and most definitely in Tintin and the Picaros. The economic interests generated by the fossil fuel industry, for example, in Tintin and the Land of Black Gold. We have, for example, drug trafficking and drug smuggling, for example, in The Crab with the Golden Claws and some others of the Tintin stories, and many other issues and historical occurrences that we see from the perspective of Hergé, who is reflecting all of this. All this stuff is contemporary to Hergé and in many ways shapes the different books in the adventures of Tintin. Of course, within the books, we can see that the books include certain really positive human values and ideas. Like, for example, the idea of friendship, the idea of sacrifice for others, loyalty, for example, um, a clear interest in other cultures, in other ways of seeing the world, in other parts of the world, selflessness and generosity, for example. The idea of journey as something physical, but also spiritual, also intellectual. Tintin's going to travel a lot. He travels all over the world, and because of this, when we're reading these stories, we actually get to visit some lands, some parts of the world that we never would have traveled to otherwise. And of course, we visit them, we get to know them a little bit better in the fictional world of Tintin, but the fictional world of Tintin is decisively shaped by reality, by history, and by the world, the real world around us. In short, Tintin helps us look at the world with more critical eyes, from a more critical perspective. It is the perspective of Hergé, but it's also a perspective that helps us think about the world in a much more critical way, from a much more critical perspective. And all of these values that Hergé introduces in his work are values that he learned as a youth when he was a Boy Scout, and they stayed with him throughout his life and became an integral part of his work, of his books. Also, from a personal perspective, I may add that the Tintin books have really helped me in my interest in languages. I have always been interested in languages since I was a little kid, and reading the Tintin books helped me learn and practice other languages, like French, for example, which is the language in which the stories were originally written, but also Portuguese and German and other languages. In fact, the Tintin books have been translated into dozens of languages and dialects worldwide, and in my collection I have several translations of the Tintin stories into languages that I will never learn, that I don't even understand. But it doesn't matter, because to me, Tintin has been an important part of my interest in language, of my pursuit of learning other languages. And it has been great help as well in learning those languages. Now, in order to finish the video, finally, I would like to show you a few of the Tintin books that I consider to be gateways into the world of Tintin, into the universe of Tintin. And I know that, some of you may like some books better than others. Different people like different Tintin stories, but I am sure that the ones I'm going to show should be of interest to anyone who may be thinking of getting to know the world of Tintin a little better. And I'm going to do this in chronological order, starting with this book called The Black Island. This is a translation into Scots, which is the Scottish variant of English. It actually happens in Scotland, so that's why I wanted to show the Scots translation, The Black Island. Then we have King Ottokar's Scepter in the original French edition, and this is the first Tintin story in which Hergé introduces the fictional country of Sildavia, which will become quite important throughout the series. I also have here a smaller size edition of The Crab with the Golden Claws in English translation. This is the first book in which Captain Haddock appears. In the previous two, it was just Tintin and Snowy, and of course Captain Haddock appears here for the very first time, and he never leaves, and in fact becomes a very important part of the Tintin series. Some of the Tintin adventures are actually two-part stories. For example, this one right here, Secret of the Unicorn, in Portuguese translation. This is part one. There's a second part called Red Rackham's Treasure. Another two-part story is the Moon Adventure, Destination Moon right here, in a Welsh translation. I'm not even sure how to pronounce that, but it is Destination Moon in Welsh. And the second part of Destination Moon, here in Russian translation, Explorers on the Moon. Then we have the Calculus Affair, one of my favorites in the whole series, translated into Papiamento, which is a West Indian language. And right here, one of the most famous Tintin adventures in Esperanto, the artificial European language, Tintin in Tibet. It's, I think, the book in which Hergé deals with the idea of friendship in the most satisfying way, and absolutely a classic, not just in the Tintin series, but of comic books in general. And finally, in Chinese, even though I don't understand Chinese, this is a Chinese translation of the Castafiore Emerald, which is also a fantastic story and one of my favorites in the whole Tintin canon. And well, that's all from me for now. I hope I have been able to address in a satisfying way the many reasons why I enjoy reading the adventures of Tintin. I'm not sure if you agree with some of those ideas or not. You may have other books of Tintin that you enjoy more than some of the ones that I have shown. I would like to know what your reasons are for reading the adventures of Tintin. Why is it that you enjoy reading the stories of Hergé? So if you have any comments to make sure to leave them underneath the video as always, and I will be very happy to read them. I'd love to hear from you, and I'll make sure to reply as well. I am Anton Garcia Fernandez. Mine is the copyright of this video, which was recorded in Jackson in the state of Tennessee in the United States of America in May of 2020, and you will be able to watch it very soon on my YouTube channel, Anton GF. As always, thank you very much for your interest. Thank you very much for watching, and so long, everybody.